Welcome, folks, to our podcast, Therapy on a Tangent. I'm Zori, today here with my co-host, Natalie. Say hi, Natalie.
Hi, everyone.
And this is a podcast where two therapists nerd out about our geeky passions and mental health. So, Natalie, before we get started with today's episode, what are you nerding out about recently?
So, continuing on with my cozy gaming vibe lately, I started a new Stardew Valley farm with my husband and my cousin. And
Oh.
yeah, it's been an interesting ride just because I like playing my own game because I have a
Mm-hmm.
lot more control over like what I'm doing. I don't have to answer to anybody. But so my cousin likes to have the shared money, and
Mm-hmm.
it's it's funny because it's okay that we share the money, but it just feels like so much work to have to coordinate and be like, hey, can I buy this with our money?
Mm-hmm.
But like that's also like real life, like being married to, like that is something that I do with my partner. But it's just like in a video game, it just feels so wrong that I have to share my money
Mm-hmm.
and like answer to somebody else about what I'm doing. But it's been a really good time too because I'm not the kind of person that like reads up on like how do I optimize my gameplay or what I should be doing
Mm-hmm.
in Stardew Valley. So there's lots of things that like I'm doing for the first time in Stardew Valley, playing with like my cousin and my husband, just because it's like
Mm-hmm.
stuff I never thought that like, oh, this is important to probably do in this first year of like Stardewing, you know. But it's been a
Yeah.
lot of fun lately just because like it's taking my mind off of like other things. I could just decompress. I again
Mm-hmm.
like when there's lots going on in life, it's easier to just kind of plug in on simple life kind of things, the farming, the mining, and all that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I've been really into lately. It has consumed a lot of my time. What about you?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you play with other folks, do you like, is it just focus on the farm and like the mining or stuff, or do you still try to like talk to the townspeople, like friendship, romance them?
I never care about the, the friendships. I don't know. It's
You're
just,
like,
it just doesn't
you're like,
occur
those
to me.
people,
Yeah, it just doesn't occur
those
to me.
townies.
Yeah, like I don't know if I care to interact with like the townspeople. Like, of course I have
Okay.
to progress in the game. I still have to like help them with stuff, but it's
Hmm.
not like my priority is to try to build the relationship and romance them. Because I also think like it's a lot of work to figure out like what do they like. Let me make sure I get them the right presents or make sure I talk to them, every week so that I get
Hmm.
like build up that relationship. And it's funny because I'm not like that in real life. Like I do really like building relationships with people. It's just
Hmm.
something about Stardew Valley where it's just like I don't know if I care to build relationships with these people in town or even to romance anybody. So I don't know what
Yeah,
that
that's
means, what it
fair.
says about me, but that's how I play. I'm like, let's make money, let's go buy things, let's go like unlock new adventures. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. So for me, especially during the time of this recording, I mentioned this before. I've been trying to get better at reading books, not just the textbooks and stuff that I had to read for work, but just like books for fun. And one of my friends, Raven Stringfield, she came out with her new book, Love in 280 Characters or Less, which is really cool because it basically is like one of those like coming of age stories, but how she tells it is like through text and like blog posts and stuff like that. So it's very like non-traditional like writing style. So it's been really nice to read. And also I love supporting a friend. I need to get her to sign this before she becomes super famous and forgets about me. So I can sell off when I need it. But yeah, it's so cool. Like a lot of my friends, like I said, I mentioned Raven had another book, Love and Chocolate, that came out. No, sorry, Love Requires Chocolate. Both. That was really good. Takes place in Paris. Another YA book. Highly recommend. And then, like, I had another colleague who I mentioned her book before who came out. And this is I'm saying this so that hopefully maybe this like motivates me to actually follow through with this, but I kind of want to write my own book. But
Oh.
not like a for fun book like this. I think I want to like write a book, something to do with like counseling type of thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting it out into the universe so that, people can gently, emphasis on gently, bully me to follow through on it.
Yeah. What's been the best part of the book so far that you're reading?
Um, So, okay, honestly, one, I love that it's a Black female character. Love that. But then again, like also I do really like I said, hopefully I don't get sued for copyright, but for those of you who are not watching, I'm showing a random page to a book, and all of this is like text message. All of this is like um chat between characters, and I just really again love this like unique style of storytelling. And I mean, I've seen this in other stuff as well, but it's just really cool to like get to know and to be able to like still feel connected to a character even though you're not reading it in like the more traditional ways. And I think Raven Stringfield, again, actually Dr. Raven Stringfield, but she's like, it's not that deep. But I think she does a really good job of like making these characters that feel like actual people, or like people that I'm like, yeah, I know someone like that.
Mm. Yeah,
So
like they're relatable.
um yeah, relatable. Yeah. So like I said, my book will not be a relatable character book like this, but I feel I want to say I want to do something with like a handbook for mental health professionals about how to work with bisexual people, because I swear if I had to read one more book that describes bisexuality as the attraction to either man or woman, man and a woman, I'm going to scream because that is not the accurate definition.
Mm-hmm. So this is you giving people permission to kind of nudge you in that direction.
Gently, emphasis on gently, nudge me. Yeah. And who knows? Maybe I'll get the writing bug, and then I'll gently nudge you to like do a geeky therapy book with me. I don't know. Putting that out there.
When we both become authors.
I'm manifesting it. Not right now, because I gotta move. I got a new job and have to move to a new state. But like, let's say within the next 2, 3 years.
Oof. That's a
I
that's
know,
a
scary.
relatively short-term goal.
Not not like have it publish, but like have like some actual movement towards, if
Mm.
that makes sense. Like not just in my thought, not just like, oh, I'm telling people I'm writing a book, but like actually like working towards it. It doesn't have to be
Mm.
finished, but in the next 2 or 3 years, I actually want to start and have some relative like movement towards a book.
Yeah, like
Question mark.
words on a paper.
Yes. More than just my name. But yeah. Okay, so today, Natalie, we are continuing our Arcane series, what I've been calling the Arcane Bond series, because I'm the social media manager and I can do what I want with the episode titles. But this time we're talking about relationships again, because that that's important, and this show is like full of relationships. But the common theme in the relationships that we're talking about is Viktor. And in Arcane, Viktor is a character who goes through a lot of changes, both mentally and physically as well. Starts off as Viktor, a guy who's trying to prove himself from Zon, the slums, to essentially Hex Tech Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And then this like weird, and then he like transforms to this weird like absolute authoritarian dictator, which is not fun. But yeah, Viktor has a lot of metamorphoses throughout the show, and he also has a lot of, I would say, important relationships throughout the show as well. And the three relationships that we're going to talk about today are Viktor, the relationship between Viktor and Jayce, who I think one of the writers said is supposed to be a loving brotherly relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. They were partners. emphasis on partners. Um, then we have Viktor and Singe, who is kind of one of his mentors, but we'll talk about Singe and how, you know, maybe we don't all want a Singe in our life, or maybe we do. We'll talk about that. And then also Viktor and Sky, who honestly, first season, I thought she was going to be like a very throwaway character, which I was kind of upset about because she appears to be a woman of color, and I'm tired of women of color dying in these shows. I mean, she still died, but she did come back. She had a little bit more of a role, and I think an important role in the second season. So we'll be talking about those three and their relationship with Viktor.
Mhm.
But let's start off with what I think is especially a super strong driving force in the show, similar to the driving force of Jinx and Vi and Caitlyn and Vi. We're going to start off by talking about the driving force of Viktor and Jayce and how their relationships plays a big role in terms of a lot of what happens in the show, and arguably, especially in the second season, it's because of their relationship that is why people, are in the hot water that they are in the show. So, just a brief overview in the show, especially in season one, Viktor and Jayce are very too brilliant, very too smart inventors. And but the difference is, Jayce is kind of coming up. He has the support of Caitlyn and Caitlyn's family. He may not be a rich guy, especially at that time, but he's definitely better off. He's young, he's handsome, he's smart, intelligent, that type of thing. Well, Viktor is definitely in a physically better environment, the one that he grew up in, but he is still very much kind of remembering the past of growing up in essentially the slums. And also he has a physical disability, which causes him not to be able to struggle with walking. And I think he also has health issues as well, where his health is deteriorating very quickly. And very early on, we kind of see that Viktor is kind of feeling hopeless. I think at one point he tries to take his life.
Mhm.
And I think that's kind of where we start to see the relationship between Viktor and Jayce, because Jayce comes in and kind of stops him and kind of gives Viktor purpose to a certain extent, because Jayce has this idea. He wants to for the city to move towards the future, to move towards intervention. And Viktor kind of has that goal desire too, but while Jayce is doing it to kind of chase this mysterious figure, ghost of his past, who kind of provided this like insight or this like glimpse into what the future could be, Viktor is doing it because he is motivated by his past. He's motivated by the world that he comes from, where people didn't have the same tools or resources that he had. That the only reason why he got out was because he was so smart and he kind of showed that he was bringing something invaluable to the place that he was working at. And despite their differences, I do think that at the beginning, you see them because they're in like their mid 20s. So they're still very young, very optimistic, very naive, and especially when working together at the start of their relationship, at the start of their partnership, you see them have so much hope for the future for them and for their partnership together. And it's really when other relationships start coming into play outside of their relationship with each other, where we start to kind of see them diverge
Mhm.
as well. And I know in the previous episode, we talked about Jayce and Mel and their relationship and how they kind of were like this power couple type of deal, where like emphasis on, I want the power, no, I want the power.
Mhm.
We definitely see how their other relationships have impact on not only their work and their research together, but also on how they start viewing each other together as well.
Mhm. And I think it's important to acknowledge that both Victor and Jace, their ideals come from like a very good place, right? They both want to progress in the future where they can create almost this idealized world where, like, for Jace, it's like the age of like development and innovation and bringing connectedness to the world and making life easier for people. And Viktor, in a way, wants to help bring almost like a level playing field for people, right? To have this world where people who come from like disadvantaged situations are able to have opportunities to thrive as well. And so that's where the emphasis that he has on hex tech comes in, where it's like this is a way to help people like me who come from difficult circumstances, who may not be as able-bodied, to be able to just catch up with all these other people that don't necessarily have some of these disadvantages. And so in both the way that, you know, what brings Viktor and Jayce together is that they are trying to create like this idealized world where this could benefit lots of different people and just be able to bring almost like a new era of humanity where people could live much happier lives. And that's the intention of what they're trying to do in their research with hex tech.
Yeah. But as we see, as the series, especially in season one, starts to go forward, we start to see kind of like Jace being like, okay, let's have it for Pulsover. Like everyone in Pulsover has like the opportunity to like get this technology, but maybe not everyone, or maybe there has to be something specific, a pathway or process that people in Zon have to go through. Or yeah, it's not great, but maybe sometimes we need to use this like technology to like show authority over the people of Zon. While Jace is like, no, this should be for everyone, Zon included. Like, like, don't you remember that I came from there? Like, I
Mm-hmm.
know not only the bad parts of that, but I also know the good parts as well. And like, if it wasn't, again, if it wasn't for the fact that I was so smart, I would be one of those people that you're trying to like put authority over. And again, we kind of start to see their paths diverge. And again, it's like they're working towards this idealized goal, but as their paths start to diverge, even their idealized goal starts to change, and like it starts to change of who has access to this idealized goals. Yeah, we start to realize like what are these two people willing to do to try to get to their goals, whatever their goals are. We see that again, Jayce kind of goes the power route where he aligns himself, gets into a relationship with Mel. He gets on the council. He kind of even puts Mel aside to again have the power that he wants. And I think it's only until he gets to a point where he's like, "Oh wow, this is a lot of power. Wasn't
Mm-hmm.
expecting this much power. Wow." I don't know if I like it, or I don't know if this is exactly what I thought I wanted. And especially in season one, we see the ways that their drive to this goal kind of starts to strip them of their like the ignorance of youth. Before they had this very optimistic like, this is how we're going to change lives, this is how we're going to help people, we're going to do it together as partners. And then Jace decided to have a Beyonce moment, and Viktor was left behind like Destiny's Child.
Mm-hmm.
No one kill me. But but yeah, it's like, and then like Viktor was left to like pick up the pieces and like figure out what he wanted to do. And even his own, even though again he's coming from this like, I want to help people who are similar to me, he becomes blinded by his own goals as well. And it unfortunately leads to the death of someone who for a long time like trusted and respected him. And it's only then where Viktor is like, oh, this is bad. And they both had those moments where they're like, oh, this is bad, but for different reasons, different. And unfortunately it doesn't really overlap. Like they are never like, oh, this is bad at the same time
Mm-hmm.
regarding the same reason.
Right.
It's just like, oh, this is bad, but this is bad because of this reason, or this is bad because of this reason. Similarly to our conversation about attachment styles, like a lot throughout the series, they're like not always on the same page, even when they are trying to kind of get the same outcome or quote unquote outcome, they're not on the same page. And because of that, that like unfortunately leads to a lot of arguments between them and a lot of sacrifice and misunderstandings as well.
Right. And I think Victor, you can see very clearly the moral dilemmas that he continues to be put into and what's important and what's not important. Because it's almost like with all these different relationships he has with people between like Jayce and Sky and Singe, it's a different view of the world and what's important and what's not, because you could tell he struggles with this idea of like, well, is do we emphasize the power of this technology so that it helps humanity, or do we emphasize the healing part of this power to help society, or do I just decide for myself what's right and what's wrong? And so he's constantly in this dilemma of like, what
Hmm.
is actually the moral situation here? And he really struggles with that, because I think like for Jayce, his in his idealized world, the path to getting there was to continue to acquire more power. But
Hmm.
for Viktor, coming from where he came from, he could see like what happens when there is like that destructive power that's, not quite placed in the right things, and what could possibly happen. And so I think like he is always worried about like what are the repercussions of my actions when he was working with Jayce. And so like in some ways they have some very like black and white naive thinking for both
Hmm.
of them. Right? Jayce is very overly optimistic at times, like, oh yeah, we just need to advance technology, we just need to have like this increase in power and then things will be great. But then Viktor is very much like, oh, but what if like the power isn't good? What if it gets misused? What if we're not totally prepared for the situation that comes ahead? And so for him, it was very much on this extreme side of like being cautious, like perhaps even overly
Hmm.
cautious about using the hex tech before it's ready, which is again like a very abstract thing. Like when is a piece of technology ever going to be fully ready for
Hmm.
for humanity to use, right? That becomes a moral dilemma that aligns with like what are your values, like what's important to you. And I think
Hmm.
Viktor has a hard time like articulating that for himself, which is why there's
Hmm.
so much change that we see in the way that he's approaching this idealized world problem, because he doesn't actually know like what are my morals and values associated with this.
And I think also this thought came to mind as you were talking, like with Victor, he's always kind of, how should I say this, like at the mercy of either circumstances or other people. Like a lot of times he doesn't have a choice in things. Like he doesn't have a choice in his health, right? He doesn't have a choice in his partner leaving him to get power. He doesn't have a choice in the fact that I mean, well, you could say he has a choice, but not an intentional choice. And the fact that he killed someone, he killed Sky, and then most obviously, he doesn't have a choice in the fact that Victor or Jayce brought him back to life. You know, like he could have died, but then Jayce was like, "Nope, I'm gonna save you. I'm gonna use Hex Tech," and he even says like, we're not going to use this anymore. We're going to destroy this. And Jayce was like, "But look at what it did for you," and like, Victor kind of just has to roll with the punches. Like, okay, this is what life gave me. Like, now what can I do with it? So I feel like Jayce like runs after opportunities, runs after like what he wants, while Victor is kind of like thrown these like curves and he just has to like kind of navigate or dare I say evolve with these changes.
Yeah, and we definitely see like the difference in evolution too. I think when Sky is killed by the Hextech crystal, we see that Victor almost has like an evolution or a change in him, because what it appears like is that he kind of absorbed like Sky and absorbed kind of her ideals and her morals and values into himself. And so then he evolves in a way where it becomes more aligned with like what Sky had envisioned that would lead to like this idealized world, which creates it created like a commune for Viktor. Like he went to the people who were also in situations like circumstances where like they didn't have like a lot of them were from Zon and they were either disfigured or disabled in some way, or they had circumstances that caused them to be casted away from like society as a whole. And so he creates this commune where he healed people. And for him, he had created almost like that utopia situation
Hmm.
based off of like what was Sky's ideals. Because for Sky, it was like, let's collaborate, let's be very humanistic with people. And so we're going to just focus on caring for people in general and create a society that way. And so that's kind of like the first evolution that we see him go through.
Hmm. And yeah, like if we're saying like Victor and Jayce are in this like constant push and pull with each other, the relationship that we see with Sky, like you said, is much more optimistic. It's a optimistic collaboration of this idealized goal, still kind of working towards that idealized goal that he had with Jayce, but just in a different way. And it's really interesting because, like, again, Sky is someone he met when he was a child, and they just, I guess, so happened to be in the same, like, academy or workplace, whatever they're in together. And even before Sky's death, you kind of see this, like, hope that she has for him. Also, a little bit of crush as well. But, I think it's still that, like, that youthful ignorance that we talked about before that
Mm-hmm.
Jayce and Viktor had at the beginning that they kind of started to lose. And I think the second time around with this embodiment of Sky, whether it's actually her or a memory or Viktor's like imagination coming up with a version of her so that he doesn't feel so guilty or feel so alone. You definitely still see Viktor in this like in his new body, which it, they don't go too deep with this, but it kind of gives this idea that like in this new body, he doesn't feel cold, he doesn't feel heat, he doesn't feel sensation, or at least that's the vibe I got. But like in this version, he's still trying to maintain his humanity. He went back to Zon, he went back to the least of the least there and healed them and gave them a new opportunity. And I think there was still some sentimentality towards, his home, his like place of origin, still some humanist despite like what was going on with his body. Because like even with Vander, I think Sky was like, wow, like this is gonna be hard. This isn't like everyone else that we like healed. But Vander was like, we have to do this, this is I have this power, we have to do this. Like this is how we give back. Like if I decided who gets it and who doesn't, then like that's not good. So like we see this like very optimistic version kind of inspired by Sky, I would say, where even again where Viktor is like in a situation where he didn't want the situation. He was placed in this like physical body manifestation of himself because of Jayce. He's still trying to make the best out of it. He's still trying to like kind of stick to the path that he and Jayce were initially on with Hextech, but because of the circumstances of the environment and time that they're in, unfortunately, that commune wasn't sustainable for a variety of reasons. One, because of just everything else that was going on in the world. Unfortunately, they're not living in a glass dome, they're not living in a bubble. So there's outside forces that, despite all the good that Viktor was doing with this commune, they still saw it as like a threat or something that needed to be infiltrated or whatever. And then also, Viktor still doesn't fully recognize like the limitations of what he can do. Again, I believe it was his old mentor Sinch who comes in saying like, hey, like the more you do this, the more you're going to die. Like you're not infinite. Like, yeah, you may not feel human anymore, but you are very much mortal. You're gonna die if you keep doing this, unless you go my route, which we'll talk about in a few seconds. But then also again, we see that with when Viktor comes back from his, trip trip through the multiverse, where Viktor was able to like essentially kill or almost kill Viktor. Yeah, sorry, when Jayce was almost essentially able to kill Viktor, and you saw how flimsy that reality that Viktor created with Sky was, that it wasn't sustainable, that
Mm-hmm.
it was just a matter of someone wanting something, one bad person, or not bad person, but one person who wanted something different, how it ruined everything. For Viktor, he realized like what I was trying to do, trying to go about it the sky route wasn't sustainable, wasn't realistic.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what I do, it's still going to end in pain. Now that I think about it more, I'm just like, wow, that was Victor's going through it, man.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we see that evolution of like the Victor Sky where, once, and this is jumping a little bit forward, but like once he decides to align himself with Singe, Sky disappears. And again, still don't know if it's actually Sky, if it's just some sort of manifestation of Sky that Victor created to feel less lonely, to feel less guilty about Sky being gone. But like I think that is such a metaphorical shift that like he's realizing like I can't do this. This is not working. I can't keep this version of Sky with me and still be able to move forward in the way that I'm about to move forward, because what I need to do is not to have that sentimentality, not to have that like everyone has a choice. Because again, that's something else that you see in this commune. Like people had choices. They
Mm-hmm.
could go to him. You could go put down your weapons and get healed, or you could keep your weapons and not come in. And even before he fully moves into his like third and or well, I would say third phase, because I guess the ending is his fourth phase of Viktor, but like the dictator version of himself, he still has this like last remaining, I guess, element of humanity before he fully evolves to the dictator version, where he's like, whoever is willing, I will turn into soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is vastly different from what we see later on, where he's just turning everyone into like where he's taking away the sense of authority, sense of self, sense of emotion, sense of control over your own destiny. That's vastly different. And so I think it's just really interesting again to see some of this plays out in terms of how he acts or reacts, because I'm not even sure if Viktor at the start of the show would see himself in even like the Hextech Jesus commune version of
Mm-hmm.
Viktor. Like I don't know if he, I mean, obviously there's a lot has changed. So it'd be like, wait, what happened to you? But also, I don't know if he would necessarily be aligned in the way of thinking that Victor is. And I think the only way that Victor was able to think that way was because of the sacrifice that he went through, both the physical and like metaphorical sacrifices.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, definitely Victor at the beginning of the show would be like, what happened with dictator Victor in the last episode? But yeah, I think the relationship between Victor and Sky is like very ideal, but not realistic ideal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a really good way of putting it because it's also like it being unrealistic was the world that they lived in. It wasn't like a vacuum that they lived in where everybody had good intention, and perhaps that's like the assumptions that lead to like false expectations of other people. Like, I think Sky really represented like a very benevolent, humanistic part of humanity. And I think that she also represented that for Viktor as well, that the benevolence in somebody. But the reality is that like that's not what everybody cares about. Not everybody values the benevolence or values like the selflessness and acts of kindness and
Mhm.
things like that. But during that Viktor Sky merge, it was very much the top of their values. And so for them, it was almost hard for them to imagine that, like, why would people do evil things with this power? Right. And that's what led
Mhm.
to such an unrealistic expectations of people, because it's like, oh yeah, if we just tell them to put their weapons down, if they want to join, then they're going to do it because we believe in the best in humanity. We know that people are going to also care about like honor or, benevolence or the
Mhm.
humanness and connectedness with people. But that's not necessarily true, because when people in Piltover try to, in a way, like take over the commune, it wasn't with the intention of like, let's be benevolent, let's do the right thing for people. Like, their values and their morals were about like gaining power and being able to hold authority in the society that they lived in. And so that's what created this unrealistic expectations with the false world that they had created. This idealized world doesn't exist within their larger system because not everybody shared those same values.
Yeah, which I think is a nice segue into the relationship between Victor and Singe, who is kind of, I know, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting his name, but like the fuzzy guy was like a mentor to Victor. But I feel like Singe is like kind of the more impactful mentor to Victor because, yes, I guess you could say or argue that he is a bad guy, but like, I feel like Singe is like definitely one of those morally gray because we find out that the reason why he does the things that he does, the reason why he does all the experimentations that he does, including the experimentation that he did on Vander, was to save his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some people can people could relate to that, wanting to save a family member, wanting to save a loved one. But I think obviously, even if we had the same skill set, the same tools and intelligence that he did, not everyone would go the lengths that Singe did. And I think, again, when we're thinking about Victor in the context of the relationships that he's in, if Victor and Jayce is this kind of like, again, push and pull, cause and effect kind of relationship on each other, and Victor and Sky is this like optimistic collaboration, sentimentality, then I think Victor and Singe kind of show what happens when someone is just focus on themselves or focus on their desires and not on the greater good. So like a more purely individualistic perspective where again when you look at what's actually going on, it's complex. It may have stemmed originally from a good place, but again, the consequences of those actions and the decisions that are being made sometimes aren't always good and sometimes aren't always bad and sometimes they aren't always intentional. And I think one good example of that in the show, at least for Singe, is the part where the people Zahn had met up for the rally and they got corralled together by the police and by Ambessa's like soldiers and stuff. And Singe was in the paddy wagon, or what I'm calling paddy wagon, with Aisha, and obviously, Asha's looking scared, and he looks down at her and is just like, "Don't worry, we're not gonna be there long." And it's so funny because it was just like I was telling Natalie earlier, I was like, "Is he gonna save these people?" Obviously, I have Tumblr. I'm still a Tumblr person, so I knew that that wasn't gonna happen. But I was just like, it's really interesting that you're using the word "we." We're not going to be there long. And, come to find out that, he was using his experiment, which is Vander, to get himself out. And I think there's a scene after like Vander gets to the prison where you see the people that originally released from prison, the Jinxers, I think what they call themselves, you see them stumbling away from the destruction that Vander caused. Like some of them are bleeding. Like it's not just the police there; it's you see some of the Jinxers as well. And again, I don't think Singe just like let me attack these Jinxers because look at them with their silly blue hair, but it was just like that helps you get out, especially, it's not like he knew that Jinx was coming. So it was like, if it helps you get out, cool. If you die, also cool. Like I'm just here to get myself out, and I have this monster who's gonna get me out.
Hmm.
And if it benefits other people, then that's cool. If it doesn't, that's also cool as long as I get what I need.
Hmm. And I see how people can interpret him as like an evil character because I think generally a lot of us want to believe in the best in people. And that's why, like, seeing this unfold, it's like, oh, he's an evil character because, like, he didn't care for other people. But I think, like, this is also a very real experience that people have too, where sometimes you can get really tunnel visioned into, like, what are your goals? What are the things you're trying to do in life that you almost have, like, these blinders on, where you don't consider what's happening to people around you. You're only thinking about yourself and your objective. And so like that's where we hit that morally gray area where it's like the intentions that I have aren't necessarily bad, right? You know, Singe clearly has some good intentions. He wants to save his daughter, he wants to protect her and things like that. But that's all that he's focused on, and it didn't matter who got in the way of that, or even if the things that he did were morally ambiguous, because it helped to further his objective. And so I think like that's such a big contrast for Viktor to see that like when I just totally zero in on my objective and not consider everybody else, like things do get done, but is it okay that it's being done
Hmm.
like that? Right. And that's where we kind of see Victor evolve into this like authoritarian dictator version of himself. Because then the idea
Hmm.
is just like, well, if I have all this power or I have all this knowledge and I'm trying to work toward my goal, then is it okay that I take away people's autonomies in order to further
Hmm.
that? And that's what he has to consider if that's okay or not. Because when he was in that version with Sky, it was very much like, oh, people need to have their own autonomy, you know, in order for there to be a better society. But he sees that fall, and so then he swings
Hmm.
in that complete opposite direction, where he's thinking like maybe Singe is onto something that if I know better and I know the way to get to a better society, I'm just going to impose that onto people. And so it's hard to say like does Victor become a bad person because of that? Because like it's good intentions but morally very ambiguous.
Yeah, and oh my gosh, I'm not gonna remember the exact phrasing, but like when Jayce is in the multiverse and he meets the Victor who saved him as a child, he says something along the lines of like, I strive towards perfection, but like once you reach perfection, like there's really no progress. There's like nowhere else to go, like nothing else to look forward to. And kind of implying that like this dictator Victor, like sure, he's creating peace, right? But like what's left? You see this barren wasteland that Jayce finds himself in. That's an example of kind of like what happens. And it's empty. You have these like machine things, I guess, moving around, but like, what are they doing, And just because there's no peace, there's no fighting, doesn't mean that like it's a fulfilling life. So, yeah, it's just really interesting to see where because again it's not like it's coming out of left field with this like perfectionism like thing that we see with Victor. Like he wanted that from the beginning. It's just he had other morals and other people kind of like saying like, yeah, sure, we want things to be better, but like perfection, what does that look like? What does that mean? And I think that changes. So yeah, definitely with Victor and Sinch, you kind of see that more of a I'm gonna do things my way. If it works out, it works out. I it's kind of like I am the hero of my own story, kind
Mm-hmm,
of.
mm-hmm.
And I do think that Sinch kind of probably thinks that for himself because what did he do at the end? His daughter is alive. Is she actually her? Or is she like a robot golem type thing? Don't know. Well, according to League of Legends, probably not. She's probably more robot than anything else or cyborg or whatever. But like he reached his goal. He did what he set out to do. He helped his daughter live. He's a hero in his view. And like this dictator version of Victor, especially in the reality where he does succeed, he probably thinks he's a hero as well. Like he, again, no wars, no fighting, no one is suffering, you know. But again, that world was kind of bleak. It was
Hmm.
colorful, but kind of bleak and not fun, not fun at all. And I think, kind of going back full circle, that's why the relationship between Victor and Jayce is so important because they're both kind of navigating these things. Like I think that's the big difference between Victor's relationship with Jayce versus Victor's relationship with Singe and or Sky, because Singe and Sky are kind of set. This is the way that we're doing things. While Jayce is also navigating his own experiences, his own assumptions and biases and beliefs, and especially in regards to this idealized goal that they initially have. And yeah, maybe they're not always on the same page, especially moving forward until like the very end, but like they're both growing and developing at the same time and evolving to a certain extent at the same time. Maybe not in the same way, but I do think that they are evolving versus Singe and Sky, they're kind of set in this in stone. And so even though, there are still probably going to be wars or fights or discrimination, I feel like the reality that Victor and Jayce end up having is like the more realistic reality. Not just because it happened, but because there's still elements of hope there. You can still have hope in that reality. Yeah, there are bad things, but there's still the room for hope, for optimism, appropriate optimism, I guess you could say. Well, again, with Victor and Sky, it was just like pure optimism. We can do everything. We have the power. Let's save everyone. Everyone is going to see things the way that we see it and be happy and helpful and nice to everyone else, which wasn't the case, wasn't sustainable, not only for the commune, but also for Victor himself, because again, as was said, if he continued the way that he was going to like crash and burn. And while Victor and Singe, I think it shows just like, yeah, sure, there are some people that go this purely individualistic route, and yeah, they get what they wanted, but also, is it actually what they wanted?
Hmm. And at
Like,
what
again,
cost?
we don't really, yeah, at what cost? Because again, we don't know fully. I mean, in terms of the show, for the League of Legends folks, they probably know a little bit better. But in terms of the show, we don't know fully, like, if Singe is like happy with his daughter. Like, is it enough to just have this physical being with you, or is at some point he gonna realize like this isn't necessarily the daughter that I lost, or the daughter that I was trying to save? So yeah, Victor. Victor has very. I would definitely say. I mean, all the characters are defined to a certain extent by their relationships. I think Victor definitely has more moral, philosophical relationships, maybe. Or maybe it's just because Victor himself is just a very philosophical guy. It comes off that way. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think even thinking about the ending of Victor and Jayce in that in the series, I think it's a little ambiguous, but I think it's implied that they kind of take each other out in that
Mhm.
last interaction so that neither of their ideals are imposed onto society. And I think like that's part of like the realistic parts of when we think about like the impact of our morals and values in the world. We can't necessarily impose our own morality or our own values onto other people. We can only let other people decide, and then we have to work with that. And I
Mhm.
think part of Victor and Jayce being, I guess, mutually destroying each other is to represent that like you have to let go of some of those things. Let go of like trying to impose what you think the world should be like, or impose like what people should find important, and to be able
Mhm.
to just let people live the way that they live, and that we have to adapt to it. And so I think like that is the realism that we as people have to do sometimes is to like let go
Hmm.
of those things, so that in a way like it preserves ourselves too, but then it also continues to advance people and humanity. Because if there isn't, in a way, if there isn't conflict, how are we moving forward and
Hmm.
trying to better the world? Because that does also change depending on what's going on in the world. So I think like Viktor and Jayce being destroyed together is a representation of all those things of like we can't be so black and white. This has to be ambiguous. Like the fact that the ending,
Hmm.
their fate was so ambiguous, I think it's just a reflection of what humanity needs to be. It's like it's going to be ambiguous. Morally, things aren't going to be the same for everybody. Values aren't going to be the same for everybody, and we have to let that be okay, which is what I really struggled with at the end of the show too, because I want to be like, there has to be a winner, right? Did Viktor win? Did
Hmm.
Jayce win? But that's not even the point of it. What they represent is like there is no winner when we're trying to impose these things on the people.
Hmm. And then, also just on a relationship level between the two of them, I think it was kind of them both coming full circle because again, they're at one point they were, maybe on the same path, but then they diverged. And I think, we see again throughout the series at some point or another, like maybe one of them will get like this insight or this like, should we be doing this? And then the other will be like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to push forward, and it switches back and forth between both of them. But I think at the end, not only are they finally back on the same path together, I think they're both taking ownership of the consequences. Because I feel like, uh, again, just going back to like Jayce making Viktor into this, okay, I'm just gonna say it, hexic Jesus. It like I think Viktor may have realized the consequences of that action, but I don't think Jayce did, or at least not at the same time. And then when Jayce did kind of realize the consequences of his action after he went through the multiverse, Viktor was like, no, this is a good thing. Look what you did, type of thing. So like again, they're always like not on the same page, but like again, having this intentional moment, despite the again arguments, the disagreements, the ways that their paths diverge, like choosing, as you said, intentionally together to take themselves out and to do it together. Because there was one point where they were spinning around in a circle, and I don't know exactly, what would have happened, but like at one point they were spinning around in a circle. Jayce gave Viktor the crystal. Initially, it looked like they were both holding it onto it, and then like Jayce like got pushed away, and it could have been very easy for Jayce to be like, "Peace out. You gotta deal with the crystal," but like Jayce was like, "No, I'm gonna come," and they, again very romantically, not brotherly, came together, and then it happened like they disappeared together. But like, yeah, I feel like that was a moment of like we're finally seeing eye to eye in terms of what the future looks like, and it just so happens that this future is without both of us, but we're finally seeing acknowledging that that is the best future for everyone. And we're taking the consequences of how we even got to this point together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So, Natalie, as I said before, the relationships of Arcane is they're a lot and they have a lot of influence on the plot, but I think they also tell us a lot in regards to like relationship with each other's, relationship with the world around us, and especially when it comes to Viktor and his character and the relationships that he has, and also like the philosophical elements of it. I think it's really important to think about, and just think about like ourselves and how we want to show up and stuff like that, especially when we're thinking about like the greater good or what's the good for others and for ourselves as well. And finding that balance, like eventually Viktor and Jayce did, though hopefully less destructive, let's
Mm-hmm.
try and find healthy ways. But yeah, I think that's it. So thank you all so much for joining us on another episode of Therapy on a Tangent. If you like what you listen to to today, please remember on Spotify and or Apple Podcasts to give us a rating and review. And if you're listening on YouTube, to like, subscribe, and hit that bell button so that other folks can find our podcast. And if there's a topic that you would like to hear about in the future, either put it in the comments or email us on therapyonaTangentpod@gmail.com. Again, that's therapyonaTangentpod@gmail.com. Well, that's it, folks. So I'm Zori.
I'm Natalie.
And until next time, stay on a tangent. Bye.
Bye.